Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevicius. Today's guest is Dr. Crista Miller, who is the Director of Music and Organist at the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart in Houston, Texas. She is on the committee chair for procuring Martin Pasi's Opus number 19 organ, and she leads a growing music and concert program there. A member of EastWest Organists, she has performed in 7 countries and 20 states, including her 2015 multimedia series called Projections for Houston Arts Alliance and the City of Houston. At the National Convention of American Guild of Organists in Houston, she presented a demonstration on the works of Tournemire and Hakim, and this work was published in 2014's collection Mystic Modern, The Music, Thought and Legacy of Charles Tournemire. In this convention, which just recently happened in Houston, Crista chaired the new music committee for the AGO and was in charge of 15 different new compositions, spectacular 21st century composers, and organists from all over the world could experience new and vital organ as a part of living tradition. Crista has just released her new double CD on the Martin Pasi Opus 19, which is called Bonjour and Willkommen, on Acis Productions, and the executive producer is Jeffrey Silver. And this CD project features the main organ colors of the organ by Martin Pasi in Sacred Heart Co-Cathedral. And the idea behind this CD is to feature both French and German traditions, which are combined in this instrument. So in today's conversation, we talk about all those things, about her experience with organizing and making Houston Convention possible, about her organ at Sacred Heart Co-Cathedral, Opus 19 that Martin Pasi so fantastically built, and also about her experience and basically music program in that cathedral, fantastic ideas that she continues to produce. And I hope you will find this conversation inspiring, because at the end of it, Crista shares one thing she wished she knew when she first started playing the organ, and it's very, very fascinating. Let's go to the show. Crista, I'm so delighted to be able to finally talk with you, and it's so fascinating knowing that you've been on the committee of new music committee at American Guild of Organists National Convention in Houston, and you just have many things and many stories to tell. I bet, right? So let's start with this. First of all, thank you so much for your generosity and your time and your sharing of ideas. I hope people will be inspired with you, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really great to chat with you. I've enjoyed your show for some time now, and I think it's really great that you are bringing organists from around the world together to make a community, and so that we can inspire each other and work hard together. So I'm really happy to be here.
Fantastic. So you just made a terrific work organizing things in Houston, right? In National Convention of the AGO. Can you tell us a little bit of your experience firsthand?
Yes, it was a wonderful national convention. Of course, a number of very talented people worked on this program for a period of about 6 years. I'm not sure if people realize how much advance notice all of the national conventions have. So I believe in the beginning there were about 44 individuals, and so quite a number of us worked on various aspects of the program. And I think that that's why the products turned out so good. The performances were wonderful. The worship services were terrific. The workshops were really varied and inspiring. And of course, as you mentioned, I was in charge of new music. So I'm a little biased, but I think that turned out well too.
Great, and you had many pieces commissioned, right, for that occasion. Can you tell a little bit about the composers and the pieces, and the organists also?
Yes, my committee was a very fine committee. My deputy chair was a composer himself, Michael Remsen, and a longtime friend, and so that really helped us in the commissioning process. We decided that we wanted to commission two types of works. We wanted to have a set of free works where the composers were not given a lot of constraints other than time. And we also wanted to commission a set of works that were based on chorale preludes, particularly chorale preludes that were written since 1960 and probably don't have as much music based on them. So we had 8 composers, we had 15 total, and we had 8 who wrote free works. And then we had 7 who wrote based on chorale preludes.
So it is a fantastic occasion that so many composers, living composers, can share their work and be able to present new ideas, right, to the organ world. Because let's face it, to this Houston National Organist Convention, people go from around the world, right, and the exposure is probably global, right, and through videos, through multimedia and technology. So it's a very, very good initiative that American Guild of Organists takes and presents those new living composers with new organ works.
Yes, and we wanted to be very encouraging this convention. We wanted to encourage people like Joan Tower and Erica Wazen, who don't really write for the organ very often, but we felt like as excellent composers they should. So we particularly wanted to encourage them to do more with our instrument. We think that the results were very good. We also wanted to encourage people who have been commissioned many times to continue their good work, and that would be people like Emily Deemer and Nashi Hakim and Adolphus Hailstork. And then finally, with the chorale-based works, we especially wanted to encourage our colleagues who are organists themselves and compose, but maybe don't identify themselves as strictly composers, if that makes sense. So this would be people like Becky Teveld and David Dahl and Chelsea Chen, who we feel are doing excellent work, and we should give their compositions some exposure. And then finally, I didn't mention this before, but so the 7 chorale-based works, we envisioned this new chorale collection modeled after J.S. Bach's Orville Buchline. We called it the Bayou Buchline because Houston has a lot of bayous in it. If you're not familiar with that Texas word, it's kind of like a creek or a small river. So we have a lot of bodies of water in Texas or in Houston specifically. So we called it the Bayou Buchline. We had those 7 commissions, and then we also ran a competition and tried to get the word out among our colleagues, particularly people who improvise and maybe need to write down their improvisations. And then we rounded out this collection with another 34, actually with a total of 34 works. So with several other works that were submitted and judged by a panel. So we wanted to encourage our colleagues who may not be exposed as composers to get a little exposure.
Fantastic idea to extend the Bach's idea into the 21st century. Have you heard, Crista, that British organist William Whitehead also initiates the new organ Buchlein project, where he invited or composers from all around the world, and asked them to write specific chorale preludes based on the themes, based on the tunes that Bach himself didn't write in that collection.
Yes. To finish it, yes.
To finish, yeah.
I love it. That sounds like a beautiful idea.
Yeah, exactly. So Bach himself didn't, for some reason, maybe didn't have time, maybe lost interest. We don't know, right? But and your idea from the AGO is also beautiful, to take probably other tunes, right, and to present them into the chorale prelude form that people in 21st century could be exposed to the traditional tunes, but maybe more contemporary language, I would assume, right?
Yes, we definitely wanted this collection to be used. That was an overall theme of my committee for all the commissions. We really wanted... Yes, we wanted people to be at their most creative, but we also really hoped that the compositions would have legs, or they would leave the convention and get use. So I think it's actually fascinating that Bach is a great father to all of us, and I think it's really interesting that he sort of calls us from the grave. He's still contributing to the art and being a great influence to composers, even some 300 years later. So I think that's actually pretty fascinating.
Fantastic. And how the new music that was commissioned was received among the organists that were listening?
We think that we've had a lot of nice feedback about the compositions. I mean, I think it's always interesting to hear people say what they like, and then some people to say, well, no, that was too challenging for me, or I found that difficult. I think that's a really good balance, when I think you get mostly positive feedback and then a few things that people find challenging. But I also think that accounts for individual taste. I was really pleased for the composers who attended and were able to get a lot of love from their fellow organists. So that was a success, I believe.
Yes, and there is a little bit of the idea that organ music had its day, its glory, its golden age in previous centuries, right? And not so much right now, because maybe let's say the religion is not so much a part of people's life, traditional church services in Western societies at least. So what you did with AGO, I think, is tremendously important to make the organ music so to say, to make it come alive in the 21st century, also to be used and to appreciate it as well.
We deliberately try to work on that theme. So we very intentionally chose our rising stars to do a premiere of several works from Bayou Buchlein. So we had a specific recital program, and then it was played by, basically young lions of the organ. They had their winners recitals. Those rising stars have won a regional competition in order to play at the convention. But outside of that, we also had them each premiere 2 of the Bayou Buchlein works, and it was fun to see them work together. They happened to do it at Sacred Heart, which is my church, and I can just tell you some behind the scenes practice time on the organ here over 4 days. There were 12 players of the organ in the convention, all total, and so practice time was running around the clock, and it was just really nice to see these young, many of them are college students, these young college students working together and to do these premieres, and they did a beautiful job. So we tried to also incorporate sort of the next generation into this idea of living music and people who will be in the profession a long time.
Fantastic idea. And I know, Crista, that you presented yourself at the conventions about the music of Tournemire and Hakim too. So can you tell us a little bit what your presentation was about and a little bit of the ideas you shared in Houston? That would be very interesting.
Sure. Sure. I've long been fascinated with the music of Naji Hakim. I met him in '97, and we share a little bit of background in common in that we both started out as engineers, and music was a second career for each of us. And so we've known each other a long time, and I've done a little bit of study on what makes his music interesting. The Tournemire connection came about for a few reasons. I think that anyone who looks at the tradition of organists around Saint-Clotilde, so we're talking about the lineage of César Franck to Tournemire to Langlais to Hakim, I think if you look at those four composers and the composition school that arose around that organ, I think there are definite similarities. A few years ago in the United States, there were two conferences around the music of Tournemire, and particularly speaking of Orgelbuchlein, particularly around Tournemire's volume L'Orgue Mystique, which Tournemire considered the Catholic modern Orgelbuchlein. So he basically took the 51 sets of Gregorian chants for Mass and then wrote a collection of works based on those tunes and called the entire thing L'Orgue Mystique. So the conference organizers approached me and asked me if I would do a presentation on just kind of the lineage between Tournemire and Hakim. And so that work is actually published in a book called Mystic Modern, and it is available on Amazon, and it's a really wonderful collection of different essays and aspects of Tournemire. What I presented at AGO was a summary of that, and then some other works, basically comparing these two composers specifically around a sort of test set of pieces. So I looked at Hakim's The Embrace of Fire, which is dedicated to Tournemire based on some Hindu modes that Tournemire used, and also Hakim's time at the Basilica of the Sacred Heart in Paris. And then I compared that to what Tournemire was doing in his office for the Sacred Heart. It has some personal interest to me since I work for the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart as well. So we have a lot of art here that's associated with that theme. So what I talked about a little bit at the AGO was I believe that at that period of time of those two composers' works, they were each experimenting using influences from the Orient and experimenting, which sort of reflected where they might go next. In the case of Tournemire L'Orgue Mystique, it seems like he's really breaking open tonality, trying to push as far as he can. You can sort of identify some prototypes of Hindu modes that appear in his later works, such as the Seven Last Words. Not quite explicit uses, but seems to experiment. And then the same with Embrace of Fire. Hakim uses Hindu modes, which by the time of Hakim, as a young man, that was pretty accepted in Paris and not considered foreign. And later you see Hakim really switching to his native Arabic modes. So I think they each, at this point in their lives, were kind of indicating where their experiments may go next.
Isn't that great that, this great French tradition which started with Franck and others and continued in the 20th century was later expanded by those Oriental and non-European influences, like you were talking about Hindu rhythms and modes and Arabic also ideas, right? So this European tradition is blending somehow with the Oriental tradition and gives birth to something else, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned a moment ago about the American Guild of Organists becoming a more global organization. I think that actually this is a really fascinating time. I think that the integration of musical ideas from cultures that aren't necessarily organ-centric is really enlivening to the art, and a very interesting one, and one that helps globalize it. I think that maybe what we see today is that perhaps we're more used to this idea, and perhaps we're more accepting to hear modes that are identified as Arabic. Whereas I think in Tournemire's day, I think the use of Hindu modes alongside Gregorian chant was perhaps a little bit more scandalous is the wrong word, but shocking maybe. And so I think where you see Tournemire, when he is using Hindu modes, he's very careful to keep them separate from the Western influences such as Gregorian chant. But Hakim in the 20th and 21st century seems to be very comfortable reharmonizing or melodicizing Gregorian melody and just switching modes and putting it into some Arabic mode. I think our ears hear that and hear it as very interesting and fresh. I think we don't necessarily, of course there are 72 Hindu modes and there are many Arabic scales called maqamat. And I don't think we necessarily hear those and identify what they are, but we do have our ears piqued and our interest stroked a little bit when we hear those devices.
I'm curious, Crista, both of these great masters, Naji Hakim and Charles Tournemire, were improvisers, right? And
yes.
Do you know or happen to hear of them, or at least Naji Hakim, using, for example, Oriental ideas in his, for example, improvisations as well?
Absolutely. Actually, there's a history of at least the Carnatic modes or the Hindu modes used in French documents and treatises on improvisation. And I think those improvisation treatises really give us a window into the compositional process, because of course improvisation is just composition on the spot. So quite a bit before I'm looking up this date really quickly. So Tournemire's improvisation treatise was written in 1936. And of course, we know L'Orgue Mystique was written in 1927 to 32. So this is why I'm wondering, he was experimenting a little bit before perhaps he had the courage to write it down. But of course, in 1925, Dupré had also mentioned Carnatic modes as materials for improvisation. I mean, we certainly can look at Messiaen and his technique of my musical language, and also the allusions to Oriental scales and his construction of his own scales. So I think absolutely we find not just allusions, but blatant recommendations to the beginning improviser to construct these modes for themselves, how to derive them. There's a quick way that you can make any Hindu mode. You don't have to know the name. You can just quickly devise it, and to use those scales as improvisation exercises.
Right. You're probably referring to the idea of juxtaposing two different tetrachords, right?
Yes.
One on top of the other, and if I remember correctly, there are 6 tetrachords, right, going from C to F, and another set of 6 from C to F sharp, right, of the interval of augmented fourth. And if you juxtapose them and make up a scale, you have not 36 modes, but as you say, 72. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes, you are. You are. I learned this from Naji Hakim, and it's another way of saying what you said. What you said is correct. But his solution, or his quick explanation to me some years ago, was take a tonic and take its dominant a fifth apart. Those are constant. Then take the subdominant and then put any other combination in between. And that will be a Hindu mode. Then you can do the same thing, tonic and dominant. Then instead of the regular subdominant, you raise the subdominant, and then any other combination of notes in between. So, but your way is also correct. And actually in Arabic scales, it's always based on 2 specific tetrachords, and those tetrachords have a name. So yes, so both of these ways are correct. Yep.
for people who are interested in reading about those tetrachords and how they can be juxtaposed and made in two modes, I think Dupre's improvisation treatise is a very good idea, because he systematically lists those tetrachords 1 through 6 and another set of 1 through 6, and people can then combine them in various ways.
Yes, it's really a way to push. I think it's just really a way to push chromatic harmony almost to the point of serialism, but not quite. It still has maybe it still has a pleasing sound to us, whereas serialism maybe doesn't sound as nice to the ears sometimes. So yes, it's right.
Fantastic. So you heard Naji Hakim live in Houston, right?
You know, he played actually at my church at the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart. Marty Bernadette Duforset Hakim, his wife, actually did the premiere of his piece. We commissioned a piece called Fandango from him, and she did a beautiful premiere. It was really wonderful and exciting. But because they were both here, I told him, well, please come and play a Sunday Mass at my church. So that was an unofficial event, but very well attended. And of course, he has played on our Martin Pasi organ here one other time in 2011, and it was wonderful to have him back and well received.
Well, Martin Pasi, he is a very good friend of mine, and he appeared on this podcast a while ago. And his Opus 19, right, stands in your cathedral. So fantastic! Can you tell a little bit about this instrument and this idea, and how what inspired you to invite Martin Pasi to build the organ for you?
Oh, I couldn't tell you enough good things about Martin Pasi. So I knew of Martin from my doctoral studies at Eastman. When I was at the Eastman School of Music, there was a new project that my professor Hans Davidson was heading, called the Eastman Rochester Organ Initiative, or EROI for short. And this at the time was a revolutionary, a little bit crazy idea to invite some of the best organ builders in the United States together for a meeting and a conference to share ideas. And it was just very revolutionary, because of course you think all of these individuals are competing for bids. Why would they share ideas and technology? But it ended up being a wonderful success, and of course has stretched into an amazing festival from those beginnings. And so because I had been involved with that, I knew many organ builders in the United States, and I knew who was doing various things. I knew some of the sounds of their instruments, and when I had gone to Rochester from Houston, and when I came home to Houston in late '04, and I took this position at the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, we were building a new church here that seated a much bigger space and needed a new organ. And even before construction began, there was a very large window planned for the choir loft, and it's a beautiful window, but usually, as you know, windows aren't so friendly to organs. And so knowing that I really hoped that we could get a mechanical action instrument, and that the space was a little bit limited, and that the building was going up before we selected an organ builder, and there was this window, I really felt that Martin Pasi does his best work under conditions that are brand new. I think a lot of his instrument in Omaha with the dual temperaments, which is, I think when you go see that instrument now, it makes complete sense. But if you just heard about it on paper and had never actually experienced it, it would seem a little impossible. So like many great works of art, once you see them, they make sense. So I really felt like, because of all of our constraints, that Martin would do something wonderful. He proposed a dual action in order to deal with the window. So we as a result have mostly a mechanical instrument, and the portions of the instrument that are not mechanical feel quite good and have more possibility than electro-pneumatic action. And then the fact that it just sounds so amazingly good is really just the icing on the cake. So, I mean, I always say that instrument's a miracle, and it really is. I mean, that we could have an instrument at all, or that it has the dual action, and then, of course, the sound and the room is acoustically so fine. So it's really, it's just really been a great blessing.
So, Crista, you were mentioning a moment ago the famous Eroi Festival of Eastman School of Music, right, in Rochester, New York. And I think we might have met each other at that specific conference in 2004, because I and my wife Oshra, we've been doctoral students at UNL, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and we came to Eastman for this specific conference to present on the work of Adam Gottlob Kasparini. And they built a replica of that instrument from Vilnius in Christ Church in Rochester. So yes, and I know all about the Opus 14 in Omaha by Martin Pasi with dual temperament. So fantastic connections, fantastic people, and it's just one part of the very small, wonderful world.
Yes, I think I remember that now. Actually, I do think I remember that. I think it's, in a way I'm not surprised, because I feel like there are certain centers, centers of communities where, yes, I'm not surprised. I do think I remember that now, specifically about Kasparini. Mm-hmm. And I did, of course, I know where you're calling me from, and I knew that the instrument was a replica, so that makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
So, well, hello again. Nice to see you again.
Right. And do you remember, by the way, when Bruce Fawkes presented the way they make metal pipes? I think they made a metal pipe presentation, how the casting of the pipe was made in the fresh air in the tent, I think.
Yes, casting on sand.
Sand, right.
Which was amazing, yes.
Mm-hmm. So Munetaka Yokota was there too, Hans Davidson, of course, Bill Porter, everybody that we respect today was there.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Those are some of my favorite names in the organ world, so that's fantastic. Very good.
Great. So let's continue to talk about your organ, right? So Opus 19, it has dual action, right? Not dual temperament like in Omaha, Nebraska, but still, nevertheless, very challenging idea, because you mentioned this window, right? Stained glass, beautiful Christ. Christ depicting stained glass window in the middle of the organ balcony, which had to be somewhat challenging to overcome this connection. And Martin probably came with the idea of dual action, right? Can you tell a little bit about the idea of action behind this work?
Yes, he suggested that we use a system developed by Novel Org in Canada, and it would be the first installation like this in the United States. And when I look back on this now, I think, that probably was risky. It was, only having been done a few times before, but it seemed to make sense, and it has been very successful. So. A simple way to think about the way it works, where electropneumatic action, when you push down the key, it's either on or it's off. So there are two possible positions for the note to sound, either 0 or 1. Mm-hmm. And with this electromechanical action, when you push down the key on our keyboard, there is a magnet that moves, and that magnet records 256 pieces of information about how you played the key, or the travel of the key, the speed of the release, the speed of the attack. And so that magnet is on one side of the console. If you've seen pictures of our organ, it's a split console. Not a split console, it's a split case. Excuse me. Okay, so that's on the console side. And then it sends the information across to the other portion of the case. I always say it's across the street, because in pictures it looks very small since the window is huge, but it's over 45 feet, so it's pretty far in reality. So that magnet has a sister magnet across the street, and it tells that magnet, okay, you move in this way, these 256 bits of information. So it's a very interesting application of artificial intelligence. And you can actually, at the key, you can manipulate a little bit the pipe speech. You can manipulate it to have a very slow opening or a slow closing, like you would be able to do on a mechanical instrument. It feels a little bit different because there is a slight delay for the information to travel across the street. But it's pretty good. I mean, I think you can grow quite used to it very soon. And then Martin had a lovely idea to put actually a dummy palette box right behind that last manual, the bottom manual, so that it feels a little bit like the tracker action of the other divisions. So it's very successful and works well.
You know, Crista, Martin successfully installed this new type of action, right, which only been done before a few times. And when I think about the technology and organ building today, first of all, the virtual organ sounds come in mind, right? They build organs without pipes today, right? Out of samples of real organs, right? And so much energy is devoted to this kind of exploration, how to make the artificial sounding organs more pipe organ like, right? So, but what Martin did and others like him is also fascinating, taking technology, right, and artificial intelligence and expanding the possibilities of the pipe organ today in the 21st century. It's a very innovative idea, I would say, don't you think?
It is, and I think actually, isn't it interesting? Because I sort of think of Martin as a very historic styled builder. You know, there are many types of sounds one can get out of the pipe organ, and I think they're all wonderful, and I like to have a variety in my musical life, just like I like to eat different kinds of foods. But I think of Martin as a historic style builder, and I think if you look at many of his instruments, they tend toward maybe the German Baroque tradition, for example. Would you agree? Which is a beautiful tradition. But I think it's also very interesting that someone who is so affiliated with tradition and history also had the courage and the gumption and the confidence in such a new technology to take a risk and to be innovative and to solve a problem. This is what always impressed me about him and his crew. So it took nearly 10 months to install the instrument in our space. They did not construct it first in the shop because, you know, they normally build an organ in a case. That's their style. And our church, the building itself is the case. And so watching them every day solving problems was just, I feel like I could write a book about some of the things I saw. It was just very, just a model of good engineering and problem solving and teamwork. So I just think it's very interesting that someone very historically affiliated also integrates the best technology of today as well.
And of course, Martin is himself documenting his work through videos, right? You know, the series of how to make an organ pipe, how to make a reed pipe, right? And he presents that in his website also for people to be educated, also for organists and organ music lovers. So that's important to show your work, not only the process, the product, the finished result, right? But the process itself, how it has been being made, and what are the ideas behind it. So it enlightens, I think, the final product as well.
Yes, I think in every way he is. He's a very giving person. I think he's also very studious, and I think that he doesn't stop learning. So, I mean, if you look at the specification of our instrument, another way it's not so like his other instruments is just the use of French reeds. And so a great genius, I think, of that specification is 2 sets of reeds. The swell reeds are more French in nature, but if you look at the positive, those are more German and kind of more velvety trumpet kind of sound, and more early music. But then if you look at the great, there are two sets of trumpets. So there's the French and then there's the German. So, and I think for someone to do that rather than having sort of compromise reeds that are sort of a compromise for each tradition, I feel like the capability to render several traditions in one instrument is just really, really wonderful. And I know that has come from his own very careful study of Klaviokol, and many of the sort of values that the EROY project was talking about many years ago. So this idea of sharing, studying, pushing oneself to always be improving. So all of those things are encompassed in that instrument.
You mentioned the double reeds, right? Double traditional reeds, French reeds and the German reeds, which brings us to your new double CD that you are releasing, right? Which is devoted partly to the French music and to the German music. Am I right?
Yes, it's true.
Can you tell a little bit about that project?
In some ways, that I'm so glad to have done that project, and in some ways, it was a really difficult project. The instrument plays everything well. So if you look at the two CDs, I believe it's about 155 minutes represented on those two CDs, and there are mutations on every manual, so you can play French classic, and you can play some obscure French classic music because there is a grosse tierce, there is a really good voix humaine, there are mutations. You can make a cornet on three manuals. So I think you could look at that and say this is a very French classic instrument. I think the instrument is a little bit like that analogy of the elephant, and then the elephant is being analyzed by blind men. So if you just see the trunk, you say one thing. If you just see the feet, you say one thing. You see the ears. So anyway, so the instrument has great capability for French classic, but you can play very well also the French romantic repertoire as well. So the room is a beautiful room with at least 5 seconds of reverberation. Late at night, maybe you might even get 7. So much like Parisian rooms, with beautiful harmonic flute and a wonderful battery of reeds on the swell. But then on the flip side, on that other CD, you can also play Svaling very nicely, all the way through Liszt. So it's just that instrument has so much color that it's very difficult to program, a 60-minute program if you want to really show the instrument well. So I hope anyone who listens to this CD gets a really wonderful picture of all that the instrument can do.
Of course, and you mentioned those different reeds and different traditions. I wonder how Martin solved the problem of temperament, because it's not dual temperament. What kind of temperament did he choose for this instrument? Do you know?
I do. It's actually a house temperament. It was designed by Mark Brumbaugh. It's called Mark Brumbaugh Mild, and the intent is for C major to sound very pure. So if you listen very carefully, especially in any pieces in C major, you can detect a slight unequal temperament. So I did include one piece in C major on the disc, a transcription by Mozart, just to sort of give everyone the flavor of C major.
So fantastic! It's not equal temperament, right? Like it would be 12 equal semitones, right? But slightly unequal, right? To still make some different colors of the semitones and different colors of different chords, which is a very, very sensitive approach to the music, but also it gives the flexibility to play many kinds of repertoire, right? Old and new, various traditions, which still sound convincing, don't you think?
Yes, it's true. We also have to keep in mind, of course, that this is a cathedral instrument. The church is in use a lot. We have there are probably at least on an average week 8 to 10 masses where the organ is used per weekend, and we have over 100 weddings a year, and many large scale services. So, obviously we wanted to have an organ with wonderful capability to play the repertoire, but as always, the first call of duty for an instrument like this is that it also plays music for a church service. So, and now personally, I love in Omaha to hear him singing in mean tone. I find that just amazing, and would love to have that. But in any project, one knows how far one can push. So perhaps at a later date, there is a space in the church that would house a second smaller organ very well, and so we've always sort of hoped that perhaps someday a mean tone organ might go there. So I'll hold out hope. I'll say it on your podcast. Maybe that will make a donor inspired to come and give us this.
Of course, now that people will know about this project and will know about Martin Pasi, how he combines those ideas and what can be done, right? And everything is really possible, and except there is one condition, right? It has to be very great cooperation between the musicians and the clergy, don't you think? Because when we are talking about those, let's say, extravagant projects, right? Omaha and Houston too, where not even every organist can understand the difference between mean tone temperament and the well temperament and the brombo temperament, right? It's very, very, let's say, it requires high degree of education, specific historical education too, and then you have to present those ideas to the clergy, right, to your bishop, right, and say, we need this, right, this space is fantastic for this type of music and this type of temperament or instrument. So we have, as musicians, we have to communicate with clergy also on equal terms, using their language that they could understand. So I'm really curious, Crista, how did you manage to do this?
We've been really lucky to have great clergy here, actually, and that's true. I say that in public and in private. So at the time of at the cathedral's design, Archbishop Joseph Fiorenza was really the key in designing the cathedral. He wanted a European building, and he hails from Beaumont, Texas, which is not a large city, but it has a lot of culture. So I believe probably because of his roots, he's not a pretentious person at all, and he wanted it also to be grand and have a beautiful sound, but he wanted it to be simple and not a Baroque looking building. So when you go into our building, I mentioned that lovely acoustic. We have some beautiful statues, but other than that, it's very clean inside. It's a very modern feeling building. So I think that he's always been supportive of getting an organ, but he also wanted an organ that worked, I mean, work in a good sense, that was a service instrument and served the people well. He is in his late 80s and is still with us and comes and celebrates Mass with us pretty often, maybe weekly. We also have Cardinal Nadarno, who grew up with Beckerat in Pittsburgh and can hold a very convincing and knowledgeable conversation on mechanical action instruments, and has said before that he favors mechanical action. So, I mean, certainly, a very musical, astute cardinal is here and was very supportive. My rector, Father Lawrence Joswiak, is an absolute gift, and he's really the person that supports us day to day. He came to almost every AGO convention event that he could, and several people asked, how's your pastor? I said, well, he's wonderful. He wanted to make an appearance to be supportive. He doesn't always understand what we musicians are talking about, but he definitely allows us to do our work and is as supportive as he can be. So we really, you are right. I think that if all of those things are in place, even if the clergy doesn't know the same as the musician, if there's a trust there and just a mutual respect, I think that goes a long way. And I mean, and in return, I think when any of these individuals have asked us as musicians to do anything, I mean, we always want to deliver as they ask, because we do understand that we know that their support makes our jobs and our music making possible.
And of course, there is another side of giving you as musicians do, because your music program at the Co-Cathedral is fantastic, right? You give back to the community and make it's a term. You create added value to the cathedral. It's not only a place for religious contemplation, then, but it's a cultural center, right, where people come from all let's say, areas of life to experience something which is beyond their abilities to understand, right, a mystery, right, and music plays a vital part in that.
We really try to be value added. I know what you're saying. I mean, I think that we do attract people because we do a rather traditional liturgy. It's still the new Mass. It's the Novus Ordo Mass still, but we try to do it in a very traditional way, and with very, with classical music. And that's a draw. You are correct that people who come here for extra liturgical events, or for like a concert or for a gathering, we do hope that they have a good experience here, and if that plants any kind of seeds, that's up to the Holy Spirit. I think that's a nice thing. We did have someone approached me after the convention and had a beautiful comment, and they said that I encountered God in your space, and then she said, well, I'm not Catholic. And I said, well, I don't care. That's lovely. That's fine. You don't have to be Catholic, but it's very easy to sit in that room and be quiet. And if you hear lovely music, or either singing or organ playing, or we also have a lovely Steinway D piano. If you hear someone, just playing the piano, it's very easy to quiet oneself and to experience something different. It's different than going to an Astros baseball game down the street, or it's different than going to a store or to a mall or some other gathering. It's so yes, we really hope that music is a draw for people.
Right, and of course, when people come, they experience this mystery, the divine, and music is all around them. They can bring their children to the church as well. By the way, do you have a children choir program in this place too?
We do have a burgeoning children's choir, or sort of a beginning children's choir program that I started 2 years ago. We are a commuter parish, so many people drive up to an hour to come to church here, and so we're a little bit different demographic than most parishes. But if you have been in downtown Houston recently, there is so much construction, particularly residential. So our demographic is changing toward younger people, and we believe children are coming. I myself have a daughter, and she sings in the children's choir, and we have a few friends who also live near downtown. So yes, we are working on that. I feel like that's just so important to pass on the love of these things to the kids. We do try to do at least one sort of children's organ sing a year. In the past, I've had Nicole Marine come and do Peter and the Wolf. And try to specifically reach out to kids. We also have schools that come and visit. We always have an open door for sort of kids choirs if they want to come and sing a mass or have a demonstration. We always say yes to those things. So we really do try to bring in as much as possible the next generation.
And maybe, just maybe, the next generation will become interested in playing the organ as well, don't you think?
I hope so. Whenever kids ask me to see or if they can touch, I always say yes. I mean, I always say, well, as long as you're gentle. But for the most part, I think kids are just naturally fascinated by what we do. So it's sometimes hard to pull them away.
So, Crista, when somebody asks you, like a kid, right, to show inside of the organ, show the bellows, the action, let them play with fingers and feet, right? Don't you remember the same time where you were little and somebody else inspired you and showed you the inside of the organ? Do you remember these days too?
I do. I do. There was a man who I don't know who it was now, but there was a man that played at my church in Brownsville, Texas, and I played the piano. And I wasn't taking organ lessons yet, but I was just fascinated, and so my parents would let me run up after Mass was over to the postlude, and I would watch him play the postlude, and then he would let me play after it was finished and everyone was leaving. So I can see that man in my memory as clear as day. I don't know who it was, but absolutely. And I think probably throughout, as I'm sure is true for you, I think throughout my life as a youngster, I can think of different people who just took an interest in making sure that I knew or that I could play, or that I had access, or I had practice time. So, yeah, absolutely. It's that whole each one, reach one tenet.
And, we will be probably forever grateful for these organist mentors who inspired us to begin playing, right, and begin our organ journey. And I remember also that children love stories, right? You mentioned Peter and the Wolf, right? It's a perfect story for children. Another way is do you do storytelling improvisations, for example, in your Co-Cathedral, where somebody comes in and improvises on a famous legend story, biblical story, any kind of storytelling that is possible? This is very powerful. We do this in Vilnius in our university church, and not only for children but adults also. They are fascinated by not only by the organ sounds, but how they can be translated from words into music, because they have the program in front of them. They read the text, and then later maybe they close their eyes and they meditate and basically imagine what the story is about right now. Like it's like silent movie, basically. Only in
that's
sound.
Beautiful.
So
I would actually love to see that myself. That's a really beautiful idea. I like it a lot.
It's very powerful. So maybe in your part of the world that could work also, because children always are children in wherever they live, and they're fascinated by stories, as adults as well too.
Yes.
So fantastic, Crista, fantastic experience from Houston National AGO Convention, and fantastic experience from working at Co-Cathedral of Sacred Heart with this magnificent 4-manual instrument, right? With how many? 74 stops or 72?
It's 76 stops.
76, yeah.
You're right. It's 4 manuals. Yes.
So
76 stops.
So keeping all of this in mind, our conversation in mind, before we close this conversation, Crista, can you remember one thing you wish you knew before you started organ playing? Just one main important thing which would make your life easier. Yeah, the main or 3, that would work too.
Only one. I think actually, and I'm saying this to myself now also. I mean, I think the most important thing is to keep in mind that anything is possible. I really feel like as human beings, we can accomplish anything if we are willing to put in the time and work. I mean, sometimes with any of these things, with making a CD or with putting on a convention or with approaching your employment, I feel like sometimes we quit too soon or we get too overwhelmed. I actually feel overwhelmed a lot. That's just kind of a constant state for me. But I feel like if we could just remember that it's just time, or like learning a new piece. Sometimes I think, I don't know when I'll get this, but I'll just do this measure 10 times today. And then tomorrow I'll do the next measure 10 times. I feel like it's just repetition and time and effort. And I think that can take us so far. I mean, intelligence is good and we need that too. Obviously, most musicians are intelligent, but I feel like, we're just capable of so much more than we often give ourselves credit for. Mm-hmm. So that, I think really that's the one thing. And I guess the older I get, the more I find that to be true and the more confident I feel in that knowledge. It doesn't mean I don't feel overwhelmed sometimes, but if I can sort of reason to myself that, you may not believe it, but maybe this will be possible. Perhaps you'll be looking back on this moment in a year and say, if only I had known this is possible. So I think that's a very important life lesson.
So the right mindset, right? The right effort, right? And everything is possible then, probably in time, right? Not overnight, right? There is no such thing as overnight success, probably, but it takes 7 years to be overnight success, they say.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, this is why I like your show and I like your blog, because I feel like everybody needs to be reminded sometimes of these basic truths. I mean, they're basic and they're simple, but that doesn't mean they're easy to believe every day. So I think that's why the organ community is important, so that even when you're quote unquote an overnight success, you still encourage yourself to push yourself and work hard and be inspired. So yes.
And you did that, Crista, for people around the world from 89 countries now who will be listening to you. You inspired them, I'm sure, and your work will be an example how to do this in any other area. They can create music, they can play organ, learn how to play organ well, they can build a new organ, or they can commission a new organ, they can organize an organ festival. All those activities that you are doing, it's an inspiration. And thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you.
Before we close this conversation, could you give our listeners a link where they can find you and your work online?
Yes, you can find me at my website, and it's my name. It's www.CristaMiller.com. My name has an unusual spelling, so I'll spell that. It's CristaMiller.com. If that doesn't work, you can also find me at my performing group, which is www.EastWestOrganists.com, EASTWEST, Organists.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Crista, for being so generous. And I wish you the creative and brave year ahead of you, and stay healthy.
Thank you so much.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog, Secrets of Organ Playing, at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice, and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pinkevicius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.